Hello, how are you? Oh dear, I can see a pattern forming here. Okay, I can only read 2 chapters at once, but I cannot leave at. Do you know why? Because this is the last chapter of the Adventures of the Wishing Chair. So I shall read it. Let's hope it ends with a happy ending. I'm sure it will. Chapter 26, The Snoogles' Castle. The children and Binky carried the wishing chair down to the Snoogles' kitchen. There was a big bare stone place with a huge wire. I'll start that one again. This was a big bare stone place with a huge fire roaring in the grate. Binky stood the chair down on the stone floor and sat in it, looking very gloomy. I know it was my fault that the wishing chair's wings were pecked off, he said to the others. Oh, please don't cry, Molly. There must be some way of getting out of the Snoogles' castle. I'm not crying because I'm afraid we can't escape, said Molly. I'm crying because of the poor wishing chair. Is this the end of all our flying adventures? It is horrid to think we may never go any more. Don't think about that, said Binky. The first thing is, can we possibly get out of here? Where is the Snoogle, I wonder? Here, said the quacking voice of the duck-headed Snoogle, and he looked into the kitchen. If you want any tea, there are cakes in the larder, and you might make some tea and put some cakes on a plate for me too. I suppose we may as well do what he says, said Peter. He went to the larder and looked inside, and he saw in there a tin with cakes printed on it. Inside there were some fine chocolate buds. The children put some on a plate for themselves and some on a plate for the Snoogle. Molly put the kettle on the fire to boil. They all waited for the steam to come out, but nobody said a word. They were just too unhappy. When the kettle boiled, Molly made tea in 2 teapots. She took 1 teapot, cup and saucer, and plate of cakes to the Snoogle, who was sitting in the dining room reading a newspaper. It was upside down, so Molly didn't think it was very much use to him, but she was too polite to say so. She couldn't help feeling, too, that it would be much better for all of them if they tried to be friendly with the Snoogle. She put the tray down by the Snoogle and left him. He opened his great beak before she was out of the room and gobbled up 1 cake after another. Molly thought he must be a very greedy creature. She went back to the kitchen, and she and the others munched chocolate buns and drank hot tea, wondering gloomily what to do next. Perhaps we could swim across that moat, said Molly at last. We'll look and see when we can creep away for a few minutes, said Peter. Listen, said Binky. What's that noise? Went the Snoogle in the dining room. You like my snores? The 3 looked at one another. What about poking all round to see if there's any way of escape now, whispered Peter. Come on then, said Binky, and they all got up. They went to the kitchen door and opened it. It looked straight onto the moat. How wide and deep and cold it looked. Oh, said Molly, I'd never be able to swim across that, I'm sure. Nor would you, Peter. And look, said Binky, pointing down the water. There are giant frogs there. They would bite us, I expect. Sure enough. Let's see the frogs. They are smiling though, aren't they? What do you reckon? I think we're going to help them. Sure enough, as Molly and Peter peered down into the water, they saw the blunt snouts of many giant frogs. Oh, said Molly, I'm not going to jump in there. I say, said Peter, what about the drawbridge? Couldn't we let that down ourselves and escape that way? Of course, said Peter. Come on, we'll find it before the old Snoogle wakes. They went through the kitchen into a big wide hall. They swung open the great front door. A path led down to a gateway that overlooked the moat. The door of the gateway was the drawbridge drawn up over the entrance. The 3 ran down to the gate, and Binky looked carefully at the chains that held up the drawbridge. "Look," he said to the others, "these chains are fastened by a padlock. The drawbridge can't be let down unless the key is fitted into the padlock and the lock is turned. Then the drawbridge will be let down over the moat." "Where is the key to the padlock, I wonder?" said Molly. "I know," said Peter. "The Snoogle has it. I saw a big key hanging from him somewhere." "Can't we get it?" asked Molly. "He's asleep. Let's try." They tiptoed into the dining room. The Snoogle was certainly very fast asleep. "I guess we could get the key without waking him," whispered Binky in delight. "Where is it?" They looked all around the Snoogle for the key, but they couldn't see it. And then, at last, Peter saw it, or part of it. The Snoogle was sitting on it. They could just see the head of the key sticking out from underneath him. "No good," said Binky, shaking his head and tiptoeing out. "We should certainly wake him if we tried to pull that key out as he's sitting on it. I suppose that's why he sat on it, to stop us getting it." "Anyway, I expect the drawbridge would have made an awful noise rattling down on its chain," said Peter gloomily. "The Snoogle would have heard it and woken up and come after us." "What shall we do now?" said Molly in despair. "We can't swim the moat. We can't unlock the drawbridge and let it down." "There's one thing we might try," said Binky. "I might try to whistle one of the birds down to windowsill and tell it of our dreadful fix. It could fly back to Pixieland, and perhaps the king would send to rescue us. You never know." "Yes, do that," said Molly, cheering up. The children and the pixie went up the stairs and into a bedroom. They leaned out of the open window. Below lay the silvery moat. Binky began to whistle. It was a soft whistle, but a very piercing one. Molly felt sure that if she had been a bird, she would have come in answer to Binky's whistle. Binky stopped his whistling. He looked anxiously into the sky and waited. No bird came. No bird was to be seen. "I'll try again," said Binky. He whistled once more. They waited, looking everywhere for the sign of a bird. "There are no birds in this Snoogle country," said the pixie with a sigh. "One would have come if it could." "Well," said Molly, looking worried, "whatever can we do now? There doesn't seem to be any way of escape at all, nor any way of getting people to help us." "Let's go into each of the rooms, upstairs and downstairs, and see if there's anyone there," said Binky. "We might find a servant or someone that might help us. You never know." So the children and the pixie went into each room, one by one. They were queer, untidy rooms. It looks as if the Snoogle lived in one for a bit, and then, when it became too untidy, went into another one and lived there until the same thing happened. There was no one at all in any of the rooms. Only the Snoogle lived in the castle, that was plain. "Well, we've been in many fixes," said the pixie gloomily, "but this is about the tightest fix we've ever been in. How I hate the Snoogle for pecking the wings off our dear old wishing chair." The children and Binky went down into the kitchen again. The Snoogle was no longer snoring in the dining room. He must be awake. He was. He came into the kitchen, snapping his duck beak and waving its cat's tail. "Well," he said with a grin, "been all over the castle to find a way of escape, have you? Aha, you won't find that in a hurry. Well, as you're here, you may as well wait on me. I'm tired of doing my own cooking and washing up. You can do it for me." "We won't then," said Peter furiously. "It's bad enough to have to be here without waiting on a duck-headed creature like you." "Hush, Peter," said Molly suddenly. "Hush!" "Very well, Snoogle, we'll do as you say. Where would you like your supper? There is a cloth in the drawer, but it is dirty. Have you a clean one so that I can begin to get your supper for you?" "You are a sensible girl," said the Snoogle, pleased. "I've a clean cloth upstairs. I will get it." He went out of the room. Binky and Peter turned and stared at Molly in amazement. What did she mean by giving in so meekly to the horrid Snoogle? "Peter, Binky, look," said Molly, and she pointed to the wishing chair, where it stood in a corner of the kitchen. The others looked, and whatever do you suppose they saw? Guess? Yeah, I think you guessed right. The wishing chair was growing new wings. Yes, really, tiny red buds were forming on its legs. They grew fast. They burst into feathers. They were growing into new, strong wings. Goodness, said Peter and Binky, amazed. Who would have thought that? Good old wishing chair. Quick, here comes the Snoogle. Put the chair behind the table where he can't see its wings growing, said Molly. So Binky pushed it behind the table just in time. The Snoogle pattered in and held out a clean cloth to Molly. Thank you, she said politely. And have you got some egg cups, please? I'll boil you some eggs for supper. The Snoogle trotted out to fetch some egg cups. As soon as he was gone, Molly, Peter and Binky crowded into the wishing chair. Home, as quickly as you can, wishing chair, shouted Binky. The chair flapped its new red wings and rose into the air. The Snoogle came running into the kitchen. He quacked with rage. He tried to get hold of the chair as it flew past him, but Binky kicked out at him and caught him on his big yellow beak. The Snoogle gave a squawk and sat down suddenly. Goodbye, goodbye, dear Snoogle, yelled Binky, waving his hand. Do call in and see us when you're passing, and we'll give you a clean cloth for tea and boil you some eggs. The chair flew home at a great rate. At last it came to the playroom and flew into it. It set itself down on the floor and its wings gave one more flap and vanished. Oh, the old wishing chair is tired, said Binky. I don't wonder. I hope it will soon grow its wings again. We do have some adventures, don't we, children? Where's Mum's ring, Binky? Asked Peter, suddenly remembering why they'd gone adventuring, to get his mother's lost ring. Here you are, said Binky, and he gave Peter the ring. Won't your mum be pleased? She won't guess what a lot of adventures we had getting back her ring for her. Peter and Molly ran off happily. They called their mum and gave her her ring. You had dropped it in the garden, Mum, said Peter. Thank you. You are kind children to find it for me, said Mum. But she didn't guess that Big Ears the Goblin had stolen it, and that the Snoogle had had it too. No, that was the children's secret. So that's the end of the book. Oh. But we have another book. It's called The Wishing Chair Again. And the first chapter is called Home for the Holidays. Okay. Love you loads. Hope you enjoyed that. Nice getting to the end of a book, isn't it? It's also nice to start a new one. See you soon. Bye-bye.